We are back on Monarch Mondays. This is where we're at, and we are checking out this sexy chap today, Henry II. Ha ha! Fantastic. We've been trotting along through the different history, or the different kings through history, and we've been kind of, I think really enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. I asked today on my stories, what are you most looking forward to this week? And someone said, in fact, two people said, Monarch Mondays. So yay, hurrah! We are going to carry on with that amazing story. So on that note, let me invite my lovely colleague, whose face you know very well now, star of stage and screen, Mr. Richard. He'll be popping along any second now. There he is! Hello!
Hey, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm all right, although I keep getting some technical glitches. I'm hoping it's not going to spoil things, but we'll just go with it.
Okay, well, the other day we had Lee, who couldn't hear half the time anyway, so don't worry about it. We'll figure it out.
Very good.
Not to worry. How was your weekend?
Very good. I'm trying to manicure my plague beard so I look a bit like Henry II. So
You're getting there. You're getting there.
Giving a reasonable impression of the man in question today.
Yeah, I love it. It's fantastic. So thank you so much for coming back and doing another Monarch. I'm loving our little chats on different ones.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so where did we finish last week? We finished with Stephen and Matilda, didn't we? We had Stephen and Matilda. What's happened there?
Blimey. Sorry.
Turn your camera around. That's all right, you carry on. So we finished with Stephen and Matilda, where they basically fought over the crown for ages, and it was a 19-year period where, if you remember, it was said that Christ and his saints slept for that horrible period, which was basically a kind of civil war. And then when Stephen died, it was decided that Matilda's son, Henry II, would take over the throne as a kind of sorry, no, it wasn't Matilda. Yes, it was Matilda's son. Sorry, as a kind of truce, because there was nothing happening. So they said, yeah, well, you can have the throne when Stephen dies. And about 9 months later, he keeled over. So Henry got it. So that's where we're going to start today.
Well, that's right. So it was really all about succession planning there, and Stephen really didn't have much choice. He was losing the battles. Really, he was about to go under, and he really didn't have any choice because Stephen has children of his own. But he comes to this deal whereby he says, okay, when I'm out of here, then it will be Matilda's son that will succeed.
Yeah.
That's where we end up with the first of the Plantagenets. Here he is.
Here we go.
That's a pretty much conjectural image there of Henry, but we'll stick with it for the time being. And so he arrives, and Henry the second, son of Geoffrey Plantagenet and Matilda, so Matilda's husband there, and he comes loaded with land, and on the death of Stephen, he gets most of England, in fact pretty much all of England, and throughout his reign, really, Henry's story is one of grabbing power and grabbing land.
Yeah.
So he inherits pretty much all of Western France, and as I say, most of England. There we go. Pretty shocking map that, but actually it's at the right end. So
well, I mean, I have to say, so you say he came with loads of land. Look at all the land you didn't have, frankly. I think he's slacking, to be honest.
Well, indeed. But in terms of medieval power structures, it's pretty good.
That's not too bad.
No, it's not too bad, and you can see he's got a little bit of Ireland shaded in there. And actually, this is a little bit later, not much after Henry's death, but he also effectively rules most of Scotland too. And famously, it's said that Henry's empire stretched from the Arctic to the Pyrenees, which is slightly overplaying it, but nevertheless, it's quite a
sounds good. It sounds good.
It's quite a good soundbite.
I guess it depends whether or not they're counting Scotland as the Arctic, which they may have done. Who knows?
Well, maybe they are. I can't think what else it could be. So, so that's the empire, and of course, much of his empire comes with his marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine. Now, Eleanor is a hugely powerful woman in her own right, and so she had previously been married to the French king Louis VII. But Louis is a bit monkish, shall we say. He's not exactly the livest wire, and he decides, or rather Eleanor and Louis annul their marriage, and it's all over.
Now, I have to say, Richard, you have a bit of a a continued love of the sex lives of these monarchs, don't you? So.
Well, we do. We've got to talk about the sex lives of the monarchs because it's so important. It's the most important thing to them. They need those heirs and they need those spares. And actually, the marriage with Eleanor is very successful in that regard because together they produce 10 children.
Hard going.
No, that's pretty good. And of course, some are lost in infancy, but at least, two of those children become future kings, Richard and John. But another is also kind of a half a king, really. He never really gets included. And this is the eldest son, his namesake, Henry. And we ought to talk about this Henry a little bit because he's quite important in Henry II's story.
Let's go back to the King Henry that we're talking about rather than Map.
Yeah, so this is King Henry II, but we're talking about his eldest son, who is also called Henry. And he becomes...
They're not very creative on the names, are they? Henry, Pillars, Williams,
Yeah, but that's kind of a thing that the early medieval kings do. Of course, they name their eldest after themselves.
Yeah.
Kind of almost repeated when we come back, to the early part of the 20th century, really, I suppose, where we've got George VI probably being named after George V. We've got Edward VIII almost certainly being named after Edward VII. So kind of the same idea, I suppose.
Yeah.
So Henry's reign is important, and he has this eldest son, and he becomes very important later on. So we might just come back to the young king, but he is effectively co-ruler with Henry II, except he isn't, because Henry doesn't give him any power at all. He gives him the titles. He's called Henry the Young King, but he doesn't have any real power or any authority. And this really is the story of Henry's reign. Henry's reign is really all about his relationship with his sons. That is arguably the most important thing, if you like, about Henry II's reign. There are other items, of course, that we'll come on to talk about. But let's finish with the sex life.
And I'm just going to interrupt you there very quickly, just to point out to people, and these will be the next couple of weeks. One of his sons is Richard the Lionheart, who we're going to get to next week. And the other son is Devilish King John.
Yeah.
Those are two of his children.
We'll look forward to talking about King John. He's good value, as indeed is the Lionheart. But I think you might have a picture there for me of Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Yes, well, I have her tomb topper.
Yeah, let's have a look at the tomb topper.
There
she is. We just about can see her there. That's great. So, Eleanor...
A lot less wooden in real life. She was a lot more animated.
Yeah, very nicely done. So there she is. And as we mentioned, a successful marriage in the sense that they produced 10 children, but Henry is not wholly faithful. And he installs a mistress in Woodstock, in the site, what is now Blenheim Palace.
Yeah, this is not Woodstock the music festival, is it? This is
no. We're Woodstock, just outside Oxford, the royal city of Oxford. And Oxford is very important for this family because Eleanor gives birth to both Richard and John in the Palace of Beaumont, which anybody who's been to Oxford, you will know that's pretty much on the site of the Ashmolean Museum, pretty close to where the Ashmolean Museum is today.
Yeah, flat bang in the centre of town.
Right bang in the middle there. And so the two, in fact, I think more than two of the children are born there. But sly old Henry installs a mistress, the fair Rosamund, as she's been known, Rosamund sitting in her bower. So the fair Rosamund Clifford, as she was known,
a bit better.
She definitely is Henry's.
She's a beauty.
Well, she is a beauty, although of course
she looks very sort of true Raphaelite there.
Well, indeed, it may not be a contemporary record of the fair Rosamund,
of course,
but it will do. So the fair Rosamund, it might, clearly will annoy Eleanor, and indeed the marriage between Henry and Eleanor kind of deteriorates to such an extent that there is a division formed within the family, which I'm going to come on to just a little bit later because I don't want to get the chronology too far out of whack. We'll come back to that.
All right.
However, let's move on to the kind of the key thing about Henry's reign. He's got all this land. He's incredibly powerful. But his biggest problem, and really the issue that kind of defines Henry's rule, is his relationship with the church, and particularly with Thomas Becket. You can't talk about Henry II and not talk about Becket. And
no, you cannot, because he's a very interesting character, and he's one that, like you say, defines Henry's reign. And they used to be really good buddies, didn't they? They were very friendly. And he kind of, he augmented, or sort of like elevated Thomas Becket in the church, and even installed him as the Archbishop of Canterbury, because they were such great mates. He was like, well, I know that if I pop him in that seat, he'll kind of do whatever I want, which is not exactly what happened, is it?
Well, that is exactly right, Alex. And in fact, Becket is the most extraordinary character. So prior to his elevation or his admission to the church, Becket and Henry are kind of bosom buddies, and they are out doing the courtly thing. So they've been reading the stories that old fraud Geoffrey of Monmouth, this monk down in Wales, has been writing about King Arthur and Camelot and all of this stuff. And Henry and Becket say, yeah, we'll have some of that. And they are engaging in this kind of behavior. They're doing the feasting, the banqueting, treating ladies courteously, or not necessarily, or wife, not, but exactly. And so they do this thing. But then this bizarre thing happens where Henry decides that he wants Becket to become more important. And he's already become Henry's chancellor, so he's kind of his chief advisor. But what Henry really wants to do is to pin down and reduce the power of the church. It's too powerful for him. In his view, it's very wealthy, it's very powerful. And really, like so many kings, he wants a piece of that action.
And the trouble is, with that power, they're kind of, he'd probably be fine with it if they were doing what he wanted, but they weren't. But
they're not. And this all gets a little bit technical, but in a nutshell, the issue is around the power of the church as against the power of the king. And it all hinges on what happens when you get a priest. And when I say a priest, at the time that we're talking about, in the mid-12th century, it's estimated that perhaps 1 in 6 of the male population are in some way employed by the church. Now, they're not all priests.
Amazing.
It is an extraordinary figure. But the question is that when those priests, clerks, employees of the church, let's call them that, transgress, when they commit criminal offences, who should be responsible for putting them before the courts? Should they go before the religious court, or should they go before the secular court, the court that everybody else has to pay adherence to? And the answer is, the church says, well, they come before our courts. And Henry says, well, no, I'm not having it. I want them before my courts. And this is where it all kind of goes wrong. So let's come back to Becket for a second, because what happens with Becket is that he has the most meteoric rise of any priest, probably ever, in the church. And he goes from being not a priest to being a priest and Archbishop of Canterbury in the about 48 hours.
It's amazing. Well, friends in high places, if you can,
it always helps
on your friendship.
Always helps. But the bizarre thing that then happens to Thomas, to Becket, once he becomes a priest and becomes Archbishop of Canterbury, is that his entire character kind of changes. And from being this kind of partying member of the court, he goes to being this ascetic who engages in activities like wearing the same horsehair shirt for months on end. He would have whiffed. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he would have. And the horsehair shirt, we should point out, is something that, this is not like a normal shirt that people would wear at the time. This is about sort of making yourself uncomfortable to show your piety and show how much you're willing to give up for your belief, isn't it? It's not a kind of case of that's just what the shirts were. Horsehair was scratchy and itchy, and you would wear it as a sort of, like a penance for your sins, really. Exactly
right. And you're getting closer to God, so he would do that. He would immerse himself in water, in freezing cold water for hours at a time.
We all do that.
Well, just to make everybody know that, he is Mr. Piety. So the result of all of this extreme piety is that the argument over power of church and power of state really comes to a head. And Henry and Thomas fall out big time. They really fall out over this. And so badly, in fact, that Becket goes off into exile, goes off to France. And there he remains while Henry kind of simmers back at home, really angry that this is not being, that he's not getting his way.
Rich, I'm going to interrupt you very quickly. Rachel's asked, why did he change so completely? Do we know?
Yeah, well, some kind of extraordinary transformation. I mean, I don't think we know. I don't think we have anything from Becket himself to tell us what happened. I think we can simply infer that he took the job of Archbishop of Canterbury incredibly seriously.
Very seriously.
Kind of just went with it. So
Yeah.
I hope that's kind of a bit of a fuzzy answer. But
we don't have anything concrete, do we? But I think that, I've always thought that's the best explanation, that, he was given this role and kind of thought, oh, actually, I'd better sort of, step up now and take it seriously.
Exactly. Exactly right.
Yeah.
And so he does. So he's in France for about 6 years, whilst the king is still getting angry and, it's not going well. And then a couple of things happen. But we're in 1170. We're towards the spring of 1170. And we talked about the young King Henry, the eldest son of Henry II.
Yep.
What Henry does is he crowns him. A coronation ceremony takes place for the eldest son. He becomes the young king at Westminster Abbey, of course, where else, but carried out by the Archbishop of York. Now, Becket gets to hear about this, and he just blows his top. He cannot believe what is going on in his absence. And there's always been this great rivalry between Canterbury and York. But this takes it kind of to a whole new level. And if that wasn't enough, there are a number of other bishops who assist the Archbishop of York with the coronation.
And marking hard that way, aren't you? Blimey.
Well, that's right. So Becket comes back. He comes back from exile. And almost the first thing that he does is to excommunicate the Archbishop of York and the bishops. Ooh. Henry II, meanwhile, is in Normandy. He's in his estates in France, and he hears that Becket is throwing his weight around and really causing a problem. And he gets very angry about it. So we get to this most famous moment in English history, dramatic history. Shakespeare writes all about this. Well, not say Shakespeare writes about this. No, he doesn't. What am I talking about?
He doesn't. I was thinking, does he?
Absolute rubbish. But we know the story of Henry II, and we get what we do have is a fantastic historical source, a man called Edward Grimm. So Grimm is a monk who was present in Canterbury in December 1170.
Perfectly placed.
That we'll come onto in a minute. But Grimm reports, and he gives us this quote from the court of Henry in Normandy. And Henry goes off on one and he says, "What miserable drones and traitors have I nurtured and promoted in my household, who let their lord be treated with such shameful contempt by a low-born clerk."
Oh dear, that's fighting talk.
So over the years, that kind of gets translated into, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?"
Yeah, that's the phrase that we kind of know famously, isn't it? And that, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" But he may not have said it quite like that. And if he did say it like that, he certainly didn't necessarily mean it the way that it sounds.
No, he didn't. And of course, though,
I mean, he meant done, but it's
so that is the moment that 4 knights who are present in Normandy take it as a direct instruction to go and sort Becket out. And go and sort him out equals kill him.
Yeah.
So they get across the channel, they arrive at Canterbury, and they go and stay at a house that still exists. All of you guys, when we're all done with this, get down to Canterbury, a fantastic place to go, a wonderful place to go and visit. And you'll find Conquest House, not very far away from the cathedral, where it is said that the 4 knights congregate prior to their visit to Canterbury Cathedral on the evening of the 29th of December. In fact, they're there in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And what they want Henry to do is, Becket to do, is reverse his excommunication of the bishops who've been present at the young king's coronation. But basically, Becket sends them away with a flea in their ear. You must be joking.
Yeah, he's not going to change his mind. He's been very clear on it. He's not going to change his mind when 4 knights come down and tell him to do it. It's just not going to happen.
Precisely. So the 4 knights who are there, you've asked for it now. they disappear, but they don't disappear for very long. In fact, all they do is they go out into the grounds of the, perhaps into the close of the cathedral there, to retrieve their weapons that they have stored, hidden away, in the off chance that they're probably going to need them. And that's what they do. So they grab them, and we've got this nice little picture here of one of the most horrific events to take place at that time. The execution, whilst Becket is at prayer in his own cathedral, the Archbishop of Canterbury praying in his own cathedral, set upon by these 4 knights, who slice off the top of his head like an egg, like a boiled egg, and then absolutely pulp his brains, and that is the end of Becket.
And he got into the cathedral because, you know, you can go into churches to sort of, if you're being pursued or anything like that, once you're in the church, you are safe, in theory.
Absolutely.
And on this occasion, not at all. They definitely, you know, they weren't going to take that as a deterrent. They went in and there's a story that they kind of put their swords into his head and like stirred weapons around and all sorts of stuff. But they made sure that he was not going to be getting back up again.
Yeah. They absolutely wanted to make sure he was dead. But the key thing is, a greater act of sacrilege you really couldn't have. It could not be worse.
No.
So amazingly, the knights kind of get away, and off they go. They run off up to Yorkshire, to Knaresborough, lovely part of the world. One of the knights has a castle up there, beautiful. And they survive. They get excommunicated by the Pope a little bit later on. Blimey, that's the least that you would expect to happen. But Becket is dead. And of course, Henry realizes pretty quickly that he is going to be in some difficulty unless he can atone for this dreadful act that really is his fault and no one else's. And as we mentioned, this is kind of the event that defines Henry II's reign as king. So when we move a little bit further away from 1170, we get to 1173. Becket is canonized. Now that is kind of record time again.
Super quick
to go from Archbishop to St. Thomas of Becket, the most important saint really in this country ever. And Canterbury, as we know, becomes this great centre for pilgrimage.
We should probably point out as well at this period in time, we mentioned earlier that churches had a lot of money, their power was huge, and realistically, if you wanted someone to be a saint, there was a method that you could just sort of pay your way into that, wasn't there?
Exactly right.
The whole necessity to have miracles and everything like that could be wangled, let's say. So if you wanted someone to become a saint,
and this is of course all part of Henry's grand plan to atone for this dreadful event, and he follows it up. So a great shrine is constructed to Becket, and Henry, a year later, 1174, gets down to Canterbury. He wears a hair shirt. He prostrates himself in front of the shrine to Becket. He lies there overnight. He is whipped by monks in order to again seek absolution for this dreadful event. And guess what? Henry II does get absolution.
Funny that.
He's back on track. He's going to be okay. So that's fine. So let's just move on. So we kind of done Becket, but he's so important in this.
Actually, we want to show them the picture of what it's like in Canterbury Cathedral today.
Yeah, let's just have a quick look at that, Alex. Yeah.
Thomas Becket has gone because in the Reformation, which we'll come to when we get a few weeks down the line, they destroy all of the shrines and all the saints, or almost all the shrines and all the saints. But off to the side, and this is where we believe it actually happened, an altar here. This is a modern sculpture, and if you take a look, the shadows are supposed to show you the 4 swords.
Yep, that's it.
The knights.
That's it, and known as the Martyrdom, and again, kind of an extraordinary atmosphere. Anybody who's ever been there will tell you it is a very, very, there's an extraordinary atmosphere about the place. You can kind of feel it.
Yeah.
And the violence with which Becket met his death, extraordinary. So there we go, that's the place today. But I wanted to just kind of move on very, very quickly to talk about kind of the next thing that really defines Henry's reign, and it's really to do with the relationship with his children that we've already talked about. he has a terrible relationship with his sons. All of them basically gang up on Henry II, aided and abetted by their mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who, in fact, is put on the kind of Plantagenet most wanted list by Henry. She is actively sought by Henry because she's been plotting with the sons against Henry, and she makes her way to England, but she's captured. She's captured and she's thrown into, amongst other places, the castle at Old Sarum, just outside Salisbury.
Yeah,
where she's held for about 13 or 14 years.
That long?
So,
wow, it hasn't that long.
Extraordinary amount of time.
Yeah.
But she is a real threat to Henry, and but unfortunately, it doesn't get better for Henry. And as we move through towards the end of his reign, he is effectively being set upon by his sons from every conceivable direction, and it's getting very difficult. And it is said that the thing that really finishes him off is that his favourite son, his youngest son, John, makes clear that he is going to fight against his father as well. And it's said that it breaks Henry's heart. He can't believe that the one that he cares about the most has gone against him. And so this is what happens. I'm going to come back to the final bit of the story just at the end, but I just wanted to mention a couple of other things. I think you've got a picture there for me of Temple Church. So I always think it's nice when we do these things, just to talk about places you can go in London or elsewhere that we might still be able to directly connect to these people. And of
this
course,
is in London. This is middle of the city, so very close to Fleet Street, the Royal Courts of Justice, not far away from the West End. So yeah, exactly
right. So this is Temple Church, and you can see it's a very odd shape. We've got this circular church, which is the nave of the church, and next door, just behind Alex, there is the chancel, the oblong and the circle, as it's often called together. The point about Temple Church in connection with Henry II is it's constructed during his reign by the Knights Templars. I think we might have mentioned them previously. The Knights Templars, this kind of warrior band of monks, I suppose, who protect pilgrims who are on their way to pray in the Holy Land. Yeah. And they construct a number of churches based upon the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is circular in plan. And this is what they're emulating here. Oh. So the thing about this particular church is an extraordinary story. 1185, the church is open. The ribbon is ceremoniously cut by none other than the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Heraclius, who happens to be in town. He's been to see the French king, and he's off to see Henry II for two reasons. One, he wants to try and get them to commit to going on a crusade. And he also has with him the keys to the city of Jerusalem, and he wants either the French king or Henry to become king of Jerusalem, to protect the Holy Land.
Goodness.
Actually, they both turn him down. They say, do you know what? I've got enough to worry about back here, frankly. I can't go to Jerusalem as well. But the Temple Church, fantastic place. Go and see it together.
Really beautiful. And some of the Knights Templar are buried inside, aren't they?
Exactly right, including one William Marshall, who I'm sure we will talk about, perhaps in connection with Henry III and certainly King John later on. The greatest knight that ever lived, William Marshall, the most extraordinary man. We haven't got time for him today, but we'll definitely come back to William Marshall.
And should mention this, a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code was a big read, and everybody loved it, and people wanted to go everywhere. It was mentioned, and this is the Temple Church that they mentioned in the book. So if you are a fan of that is a great one to go and see if you're kind of
Tom Hanks was here. He was here.
Tom Hanks was here.
Yeah, very good. So look, we're almost done. I just wanted a brief picture. The other thing that Henry does, he's an inveterate castle builder. Hopefully you've got a picture there, I think, of Dover Castle, Alex.
Oh, no, I don't think I...
Okay, never mind.
Sorry, my darling.
It doesn't matter. Henry builds castles. If you really want to...
I like.
There we go. Beautiful. There it is. This is probably the most famous castle that Henry's built during Henry's reign. Fantastic place to go and visit, decked out as it would have been in Henry's time. Great one for the kids to go and see. So
really
when we're back
great.
open,
love it.
Super, really wonderful. But this is where Henry builds these great castles, and probably Dover the best example of all of them. So we come to the end. We're coming to the end. We mentioned Henry's fallen out with all of his sons. He's fallen out with John. He's absolutely gutted about that. So we get to 1189, and he's in France near the fortress of Chinon, another great fortress that Henry builds. Now, and just prior to going to Chinon, he had a meeting with the King of France at which they were trying to thrash out some kind of treaty to work out a way forward that was going to work for both of them. And it said during that meeting, a storm blew up. There was a great clap of thunder, flash of lightning. Henry's horse rears up and he's thrown from his horse. Now, that may have contributed to his death. And a few days later, he's back at the castle of Chinon and he dies. And that's it. That's the end. There he is again, Fontevraud Abbey, not far away from the fortress of Chinon, where he is buried with his wife Eleanor. But you don't have to go to Fontevraud to see this. You can go to the V&A. You can go to the Victoria Museum.
You can.
And you can see replicas of these fantastic tombs in the V&A, which is great. Where you can see it all there.
There's a lot of kings in this period of time that aren't buried in England, are they? Because, like you said, with that map,
yeah.
They have this huge swathe of land in France as well. So there's a whole chunk of medieval knights in this sort of period that, are in France.
That's exactly right. And to end, this is really the thing. No other king gets close really to managing and hanging on to as much territory as Henry does. By the time we get to the end of John's reign, it's pretty much all gone.
Yeah.
Most of it is gone. So really, he's an extraordinarily successful king in managing his lands and keeping them for pretty much the duration of his time, against pretty extraordinary odds. Most of his family going up against him. So there we go, Henry II. Fantastic.
Thank you very much. Right, I've got a couple of questions. So,
yeah.
Our lovely, colleague Cynthia says her partner's from Chinon, and his grandparents' house looked out onto that castle, which is fantastic.
Oh, amazing!
I mean, how amazing!
Yeah.
Avril, another our colleague, says 2 of the knights came from the village where she is in Somerset, Willerton and Samford Brett.
Which 2?
Not sure. Not sure, to be honest.
Yeah, well, we'd be good to know.
So let's have a little look. Got a couple. Oh, Rachel's asked, best book to read. Anything more on this? Do you have any?
Well, I listen, for this kind of stuff, Dan Jones is very good. His kind of magnum opus on the Plantagenets gives you quite a lot on this. Yeah. Quite good on Becket. In fact, quite a big chunk all about Henry II and the Angevin Empire. So, he's easy to read.
And if you want something lighter, Historic Royal Palaces do a variety of different books, and they've got one that's on a whole book on every single monarch, and they've got other ones on things like the Tudors, and I think they've got a Plantagenet one as well. So they do some really good things. To be honest, I quite like horrible histories. It sounds weird, but it's great.
No, horrible histories is great. Does
very historically accurate. I think that's it for questions.
Very good.
So that is it. Thank you so much, Richard. Fantastic. Lovely to have you back again.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you to everyone else, everyone who's joined in today.